So we'll get started. Hi, everybody. I am Trista Harris. I'm the president of Future Good, and I'm going to be hosting this session today on creating an equitable future within your organization. I've got Julie on my team that's going to be helping today with any questions that you have in the chat box. So if you have questions as we go, just type them into chat, and Julie is going to read those for me. Julie, I'm going to have you start admitting people that are in the waiting room as we get started. So I'm going to keep all of you muted so that we keep good sound during this. I know that we've all been enjoying the Zooms with the dogs in the background, and then the neighbors are doing construction all the time. So we'll try it muted so that you guys can hear a little bit better what's going on. So as I said, I'm Trista Harris. I'm a philanthropic futurist, which means I help foundations and nonprofits know what's coming next. And some of you maybe haven't met a philanthropic futurist, so I'll tell you a little bit about how I got here. I was running a community foundation a little bit over 10 years ago, and it was my first time running a foundation, and I had a little post-it note on my computer that said, "Learn how endowments work," because I was responsible for the endowment and I did not know how it worked. And later on that month, the stock market crashed and our endowment lost between 30 to 50% of its value. That was back in 2008. And suddenly it was like, well, what do you do when you're a foundation that actually has no resources to give to the communities that you care about? And so I reached out to big foundations and to associations and said, what is going on? What happens next? How do we move forward? And what I got was crickets. And so in that time of sort of confusion and upheaval, people weren't really sure what to do next at a time where our grantees needed so much from us. And that led me on a journey to figure out what tools would help me figure out what was coming next for our grantees. And that's how I found Futurism. Futurism is a tool usually used by businesses to understand what color shoes you want to buy next year, and by the government to figure out who's going to hate us next. So it really has been used by those two sectors, but not used very widely by people that do good for a living. And I think that's a shame, because I think they are really powerful tools that help us do good better. And so I've been on a journey to help people learn as much as they can about the future. As a result of the Headwaters Foundation starting to use that futurism lens, in just a couple years, we had a win on marriage equity for the state of Minnesota. And we had 5 or 6 other legislative wins, including first in its country homeowners bill of rights. And so that really happened from us understanding what was around the corner and helping our grantees understand how to harness those trends. Because of that experience, it's really led me to this place of wanting to help lots of people like you understand what's coming next. So over the past 10 years, I've been in my own journey to learn as much as I can about the tools of futurism. I've interviewed experts in dozens and dozens of fields, including things like human genome mapping and disaster first response, virtual reality, asteroid mining. Who knew that was a thing that happens? I studied strategic foresight at Oxford University and at the Institute for the Future. And now I'm president of Future Good, which is an organization that helps nonprofits and foundations build a better future by using these sort of visioning tools. For each of those projects and that work, there's an equity lens for that work and an equity frame for how we do things, because I think the best future is an equitable future. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So the tools that I'm going to share with you are in my book, Future Good. I wrote it because I wanted social sector leaders to see how futurism could help them change the world in all the different ways that they want to. These tools are especially important during rapidly changing times, which, if you haven't noticed, that's what we're in right now, is a time of rapid transformation. Because of that, I'm giving away electronic copies of the book free during the pandemic. So if you go to tristaharris.org, there's a little pop-up that shows up, and you can download a free copy. I also know that it's really difficult to be a future-focused organization if you can't get other members of your team on board. And so please share this with your colleagues and your board members so that you can help speed up that systematic change, because you have other people on your team that are helping you move it forward. So this is part of a 4-part webinar series. This is the first of 4. The first one today is about setting the stage and creating your ideal future. Next Friday, it's signals of the future. Those are sort of hints of what the future is going to look like. After that is understanding your current reality. What are the systems that you're a part of now, and what sort of change has to happen to get there? The last session is getting from here to your ideal future. So what's the transformation that needs to happen to get from here to there? If you sign up for all 4 sessions, you receive a certificate of completion. I think certifications are going to end up replacing college education at some point, but that is a subject for a talk about the future of education. So if you signed up for this session but didn't sign up for all 4, use that bit.ly link that's at the bottom to sign up for the other sessions. And I've been on the search for a tool that lets you sign up for all 4 sessions at once, and I haven't been able to find them. So I'm sorry that was confusing as you were signing up. So this session today is about setting the stage and envisioning your ideal future. We're going to talk about a 2 curves model that I use to help organizations understand both their present and their future. And we're also going to talk about how to create an ideal future and what that means. I also just want us to all notice that we are in the middle of a movement moment right now. I'm based in Minneapolis, and so the murder of George Floyd is very close to my heart, and we have been living through a time in the city of very rapid transformation, much of it very, very painful. But I think if you harness that change, which I've seen a lot of really smart organizers do in this moment, these are the times that you get permanent systemic change. After Philando Castile was killed, I spent a year on a governor's council on law enforcement and community relations. And it was the longest year of my life, and a really frustrating process of community working with police and trying to find a way forward. Out of that process, we came to an agreement for increased spending for police training, with a requirement that some of those training dollars would be used for diversity, equity, and inclusion training for officers throughout the state of Minnesota, and training for supervisors to help them understand who those bad actors are within their department. When this George Floyd situation happened, it was such a disappointment because of all of the blood, sweat, and tears that community had made in developing this good faith agreement with the police department. But what I've seen happen in the last week is a lot of the changes that we had been pushing in that process and getting nothing but resistance from elected officials and decision makers are now moving forward very quickly. So Minneapolis City Council is meeting today to develop a new strategy for the police department. The Minneapolis Public Schools and the University of Minnesota have severed their relationship with the Minnesota Police Department. Every Minneapolis school has police officers that are housed within the school buildings, which has been a source of pain and strife in the community for a long time. And so change is happening quickly. And I think in any of these movement moments, we have to remember that there has been slow progress over long periods of time, and then we have periods of quick progress. And when organizations are well positioned and know where they're going and know what equity looks like, they're much more likely to be able to harness these moments to move forward permanent change. And so it is painful and difficult as we're going through them. But for nonprofits and foundations that sort of have their eye on where they're going, really can create systemic transformation in these moments. And so I encourage all of you to think about what that looks like within your own institutions. We also are going through a pandemic, because could we not have enough going on in 2020? We've got pandemics and unrest and murder hornets and just a lot that is happening at one time. But pandemics create these in-between times, and that's what we're living in now, where our former way of being and doing is over. It's going to be completely different when we move forward, but what it looks like, we have no idea. And that is really unsettling for people that love to have linear paths forward, and that's what humans are really built for. But it's also an incredible time to build what's next. And so I think there's a lot that we have to do to take good care of ourselves in these moments so that we're able to help shepherd that transition. But it really can be a time of powerful change into whatever that future looks like. And we decide what that future looks like. It doesn't happen to us. We create it with the decisions that we're making today. I think one of those transformations that I've seen is Bank of America pledged $1 billion with a B to address racial and economic inequality. It is a new day for these sort of conversations. If you would have asked me if that was possible 2 weeks ago, there's no way. But we are in a different time, and so transformation looks different during that time. And it's also a critical time for organizations to understand what equity looks like inside your organizations and externally through the work that you do. So there's a model that was developed by Ron McKinley in partnership with the Minnesota Council on Foundations. And this is described as the 4 roles of a foundation when it comes to implementing an equity frame. This can also be used for nonprofit organizations. You just switch out that funder role as a program provider role. So that's really your external role as an organization. So that first one, funder, program provider, that's your grant making or your program efforts that happen in the community. It's your mission and your transformation that you're trying to make. A community citizen is how your organization uses its voice and how do you stand up for equity? When do you decide to send out a statement? When do you decide to speak up when somebody else in the field has bad practice, or when institutions that your organization partners with have bad practice? Next is your role as an employer. That's how you both recruit and retain staff. Next is your role as an economic entity. So how are you spending or investing organizational resources to create a more equitable future? And so I've helped a lot of organizations implement this frame, because if you only focus on this external role, this funder or this program provider role, what happens is your insides don't match your outsides and you're not walking the talk. And that is really disheartening for staff who hear you saying one thing externally and acting one way externally, but you can't retain staff of color. Or you say economic justice is important in communities of color, but you don't have any vendors of color as an organization. So it's when you do all 4 of these things, what it becomes is a flywheel where each of them moves the other pieces forward more quickly. And I think organizations need to work equally on all 4 of these roles. And there's a lot of different strategies that you can have in each of these. I'll focus just on the economic entity one for a minute. When I was at the Minnesota Council on Foundations, we had been encouraging foundations to think about where they were spending their money and making sure that we had created this model. And so obviously we knew about it for a long time. And when I asked our accountant, well, how much do we spend with people of color owned businesses? And she's like, well, how would I know that? I'm like, how are we not keeping track of this if this is something that we're encouraging others to do? And so we adjusted our accounting procedures and added a checkbox in the system so that we could keep track of what were the businesses that we were supporting. We asked all staff members that were spending any money, which was everybody that was on staff, to keep track of that spending and to work hard to identify new vendors. And it was a challenge at first, where we had long-term relationships with, printers and caterers and that sort of thing. And anytime you're doing something new, it feels hard. because it's different and you've got to reach out in ways that you haven't in the past. Some staff members had concern about quality and price and those sorts of things. And what I said is the expectation is that we diversify who our vendors are, do the work to figure out who's out there, and then we will have a conversation about who's a good fit for the organization, but you have to do the work first. And what we found in that process is, one, we started with caterers because it was the easiest. And suddenly we had caterers who brought us delicious food that was way cheaper than the stuff that we were getting from some of the larger chain places. One of our caterers would bring us fresh flowers every time he brought us delicious food. And it really transformed the sort of meetings that we were hosting, because suddenly you had delicious food that was connected to the community. We encouraged all of our vendors to have business cards that were at the front of the buffet so that the foundations that were there could understand who was providing this to them, and then they started hiring those vendors. And what we very quickly saw is that Lachelle from Lachelle's Kitchen was one of our first caterers, and she grew like crazy because those relationships and networks, and her food is delicious. That makes it a lot easier. It really has a ripple effect in all of the places that you have relationships. We found that same thing with printers and facilitators and those sorts of things. And so it really is about what walking the talk looks like within your organization. So the model that we're going to work through today is a 2 curves framework, which I initially learned at the Institute for the Future. And the thing that I really love about this model is it shows the present time, and in present you have your current reality. That's the way that your organization has always been doing its work. But you also have signals of what the future is going to look like. You have these sort of bright spots that are popping up that give you a hint to what's next. And in the future, you have your ideal future that you're working towards. But what you also have in this model is that you don't get rid of everything. You keep what works about your current organization. In many institutions, this is mission and skilled staff and connection to community. In each organization, it's different what you keep in the future as you're working towards a more equitable future. This is a tool that is sometimes called backcasting. In this method, you don't try to predict what's going to happen next based on demographics and trends and some of those other tools that futurists use to understand what's coming next. Instead, you decide what you want the future to look like. And then you create that future through the decisions that you're making today. So this is really about thinking about the best possible equitable future for your organization. And I try, when clients are doing the brainstorming tied to this, we usually use a 20-year time frame, 20 to 50 years, depending on how complicated the transformation is. What that long time frame gets you is a couple things. One, it takes ego out of the process. Who's going to get credit for this transformation? Is my department going to be the lead? Are you going to be the lead? Do I have to give something up in this process? It also lets go of this thing that we have in the back of our heads about our current workload, where we are already so busy. How could we possibly do something new and something more? And so it lets all of that go, because then suddenly it's about legacy and what you're leaving behind. It's not about what's happening in this very moment. And so a 20-year vision can actually come true in years 2 or 3, because it's about getting people aligned, and really is something that's possible. But if you can't see it, and if you don't give people a long enough time frame, they can't understand what's possible. Excuse me. So the way that this works in the before times when we were in person is that we would pull together a room of people that are very invested in the organization: board members, staff members, clients or community members, partners. This could be 20 to, there's been times where it's groups of 200 people. that are envisioning together what this future looks like. I felt like I was keeping 3M in business with my Post-it note purchases, because what you do is you give everybody in the room a pack of Post-it notes, and you start in this ideal future quadrant, and you ask them to you ask them to write up individual ideas of what that ideal future looks like. And the facilitator leads that discussion, and each idea gets one Post-it note. So in that process, then as people have written down their ideas, then the facilitator says who has an idea to share. And people raise their hand and they say their idea out loud, and then you say who has something similar. And then you're grouping those Post-it notes. There's usually this visual on a blank wall in the front of. And what happens is people can start to see where there's energy, because there's piles of Post-it notes where lots of people have had the same idea. And then I let people get up and they start to name those big ideas with a different shaped Post-it note, and you're sort of sticking those on top of the big ideas. So once you have that vision of what that ideal future looks like, you move next to signals of the future. So those are things that we are doing right now. It could be just one person, one department, something we tried once, but have not continued to do, that will lead us directly to that ideal future. And the reason for this timing of ideal future and then signals of the future is you're building confidence of the people that are in the room, so that they know, like, this is a big vision, but we're actually well on our way. And then the next step that you do is current reality. Sometimes I do, depending on how tense the organization is, I will have people write down their ideas, and then they'll go put them up on the wall, and then they'll work together to sort those ideas so that somebody doesn't have to raise their hand and say, we have a CEO that isn't invested in equity. You don't want to put people in that position as they're doing this sort of visioning, but sometimes those things need to be seen. And so the writing it on the Post-it note and then people sort of bunching those ideas makes it clearer. And then the keep what works is really about, what are you doing right now that you want to keep in the future? What are things that are so core to your organization that you want to make sure that they don't get lost in the transformation that it takes to get from that first curve to the second curve? In this time of coronavirus, what this has looked like is sessions like this, where we're doing this work on Zoom, and we're either using the chat function to collect ideas, or we're using a shared Google Doc. So in the Google Doc, people are typing up ideas, and then they're working together to start to bunch those ideas. I have not found a great online tool that people can use that replaces that Post-it experience. I think Google Doc is probably the easiest for everybody to use, and they can easily get the link and sort of share those ideas. You just want to make sure that the things that are being brainstormed in that process are getting captured by whatever tool that you're using. The last thing that I'll say about online sessions is, when we're in person, we often fill out this chart in a half day or a full day retreat. If you're doing it online, it needs to happen over multiple days or multiple weeks, and no more than an hour to an hour and a half for a session, because people just get really tired, and it's hard to ideate when you are staring at a screen all day. The other ways that I've had people do this is, I'll describe the areas, and then we all get off the call and we go into that Google Doc and we type up our ideas, and then they take a break, and then we come back and we talk about it. So anything that you can do to get people away from the screens, it helps them come up with better ideas. So I showed you that 4-part model that the Minnesota Council on Foundations developed about those 4 roles. You can use it in this 2-curve framework, where you're actually brainstorming, what does that ideal future look like for our role as an employer? What does it look like for our role as a community citizen? And so it takes a little bit longer, obviously, to do this envisioning for each of these 4 areas and then each of these 4 quadrants. But what you end up with at the end of this is a really clear work plan of what it takes to get from that first curve to the second curve, because you've broken it down into those individual roles. So sometimes the way that we will do this is 4 sessions, and they're focused on a different role each time. So we'll do ideal future for our role as an employer, we'll do signals of the future, we'll do our current reality, and then what we should keep just about that role, and then we'll do it again and again and again. And what you'll see is that some of the solutions and some of the challenges are overarching, and they go across multiple categories. That's great, because that is low-hanging fruit and things that you can start on that make it more likely that you move to that future. So today we're going to focus.
Krista, I'm going to jump in here.
Oh, please do, Julia.
Sorry, thanks. Just going back, we just had a question kind of going back to your Bank of America illustration. The question is, I'm still sitting with a $1 billion pledge by Bank of America. My ideal future would be that a bank doesn't extract enough profit to have $1 billion to throw around.
For sure.
I'm thinking about a role of big banks in destroying Black wealth during the foreclosure crisis.
Yep, 1,000,000%. So as somebody that's worked in philanthropy for a long time, the way that I have landed on this is that for many foundations, their money has come from the worst places and the worst things that you can think of. It really is about that extraction. And the work of philanthropy is to transform those dollars into what transformation looks like in community and what liberation looks like. And so, yes, I agree. There should not be one donor or one company that has that many dollars that they're able to invest in an issue because they've been sitting on it for that long, but they do. So they are sitting on those dollars. And what I love to see is those dollars then going into communities that have been hurt by the ways that those businesses and donors have been doing business for a long time. So yes, I'm sitting with that too. And thinking about what we're building towards is especially critical, because if we don't have a path of what that financial liberation looks like, then how do we get there? But we're also starting from where we are in this moment.
And Trista, can I just add one more comment from a listener, a participant? I am actively looking at how to incorporate different meeting formats for those differently abled to create equity.
It is so hard in this sort of online world that we're pushed into, to adjust tools in a way that they're equitable and that people can use them that have different abilities. I think a lot of the companies have been trying to make those adjustments. There's a lot of work from the national disabilities organizations, some really positive, that have said that this transformation to online for people with certain types of disabilities has been fantastic, because there are not the physical barriers that exist often when we're bringing people in person. And then for other types of disabilities, it has been much, much more challenging. And so I think the goal is always to think about who is the hardest to reach person in the community that you're working with. What are the barriers that exist? And make sure that, especially when you're facilitating something like this, where you're trying to develop that vision of what it looks like moving forward, make sure that you've adjusted your tools so that it works well for that person that's hardest to reach. And what I found is that those sort of tools work better for everybody. It's not like a lot of these tools have been easy to use overall, but when you adjust it for the hardest to reach, then suddenly it works better for everybody. Julia, any more questions from the first part?
Nope, that's it at this point.
Sounds good. So what I'm going to have you do now is I'm going to break you into breakout groups so that you can chat with each other about what this ideal future looks like. This is within your organization, and a couple things that I'll say about ideal future visioning. You're going to have 10 minutes to talk with each other in this breakout group. Think 20 years into the future. All staff are on board. Everybody's like 100% into this. Budget is not an issue. This is really the most positive possible option, where you get exactly what you want. What does it look like then? I'd encourage you to keep your vision pieces positive. So it's what you do want, not what you don't want. So for an example, your organization is welcoming and supportive of people of color staff, not we don't have an oppressive environment. So you're sitting in that space of what we do want. This is sometimes difficult, especially when we're working in really frustrating organizations, to even imagine what's possible. And so that's why I encourage you to really use that long-term time frame and to sit in that space of, yes, it 100% works. Because that act of creating that vision makes it more likely that that future is possible. So I'm going to break you into breakouts. You have 10 minutes, chat with each other, and then the ideas that you're developing, I'd ask that you stick it into the chat box so that we can collect some of those ideas. Any questions about the breakout before we go?
So here's a question. I am not currently with an organization consulting, but would like to use this approach with organizations I work with.
Yeah.
And another person echoes that, me too.
Think of an imaginary organization. So your ideal client, what would they look like at the end of this process if it was completely successful?
And then there's a couple of resources. Ideaboards.com is a digital sticky note board, and then Google Jamboard.
Oh, I love it. Okay, perfect. Well, you guys are broken out and be looking at those tools. All right, you've got 10 minutes and I'll call you back when it's time.
And Trista, we just had one more person enter.
Okay, sounds good. And did you let them in?
Yes.
Okay, so that new person, when they join your breakout group, give them the directions on what you're doing to get together. All right, here we go.
Looks like we have a couple people still in here, and I was put in the breakout room, Trista, so I removed myself.
Okay, perfect. Let me. Angela and Shara, you need to move to your breakout group if you're able. If you're on just a phone only, it might not let you go. Otherwise, you can hang out here with us. Julie, I'll be back in just a minute.
Okay. Shara, we can't hear you. Are you? Let me just unmute you, and then you can, if you're trying to communicate with us. Can you hear? Can you speak now, Shara? Let's try that one. Hello? Shara? I think I unmuted you, and you are right. I cannot hear you, so I'm going to message you. Trista, Shara just let us know, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name, that she said, I don't believe you can hear me. And so I unmuted her, but I still can't hear her. And I sent her a text saying, maybe it's a text glitch, and are you unable to go into chat? I'm waiting to hear back. Up. Oh, she's in a chat group. Could see that I'm here, but can't hear me. I'll try again. She's using her phone. That may be why. But the chat room, obviously, she's in is ours. And Trista, you're on mute, so I can't hear you.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
Yeah, I just say, just stick around here. I think sometimes with the phone, the breakout function doesn't work. So for you, just think about what that ideal future looks like.
And Trista, just to update you, she says, all good. She's listening in the breakout room that she's in.
Okay, perfect.
Trista, we have another person that just joined us, Aisha.
Hey, Isha, I'm going to send you to a breakout group. We're having a conversation about what ideal future looks like. And the folks in the group can give you directions. And Julia, we're going to do a question and answer when I pull everybody back. It's always a weird thing when you get dragged out of the Zoom portal and your conversation back into the big group. So I'm going to open it up for question and answer. I'd love to hear just a little bit about what you've been talking about in your chat, and any questions that you have either about creating an equitable future or about some of the process pieces. And put your questions or thoughts in chat, and Julie is gonna say those for us.
Okay, do we have everybody back?
Yep, everybody should be back.
Okay, great. So the first point is somebody clicked out accidentally. We were talking about the future of education, the future of schools, especially schools in lower income communities. Wouldn't it be great if in 20 years, the children and families would value education?
I have a lot of thoughts about the future of education. I've got a daughter that's a junior in college, and our son is in high school. And I had hoped that the college system was going to collapse before we had to send her, because it's so expensive and isn't providing the value that's needed at this moment. And so I think this experiment that we've had with what's computer-based education looks like during this time, as messy and as frustrating as it is, really looks a lot like what the future of education is going to look like. And some kids really thrived in that environment of not having to sit in a classroom, but instead really self-direct their learning. Others, it was really, really difficult. And so I think we're going to have more flexible structures in the future.
Our next question or point is that, quote, work ourselves out of a job, end quote, increased supports for changes in community, increased role of organization and advocacy in local, statewide, and national policies, and more collaborative work across organizations to address major issues.
For sure. I have a model about the future of philanthropy that's really about how funding collective impact tables and collaborative work is the only way to actually solve problems, because not one foundation or one nonprofit is big enough or has the expansive connections necessary to solve problems. I think a question for all of us to ask is, what would it look like to close our organization down? How would we have to transform for that to be possible? And if we sit in this place of incremental thinking, which is often where we are, let's serve 5% more kids this year, let's do a little bit more work, you never actually get to the part of solving problems. One of my clients that's a youth academic after school program did this visioning, and what they realized is their ideal future, kids wouldn't need academic programs after school, that they would just hang out with their friends and have a great time because they were getting everything that they needed during the school day. And that doesn't happen if your organization is working on serving more kids. And so they developed a dual strategy, because we're not in that future yet. So obviously you still need the program, but What does it look like if you invest some of your staff time and energy on advocacy to make sure that schools are getting the resources that they need to be able to support kids? What does it look like if you are investing some of your staff time into teacher training to make sure that they're getting the tools that they need to help kids be successful? And that dual model will make it much more likely that you get to that ideal future.
The next comment, we liked a future with a diverse leadership in organizations and in political offices. We agreed your idea to think about what vendors you hire is an immediate action organizations can take.
I think that leadership piece is so important, and just starting with, first, does your organization, is it representative of the community that you're based in and serves demographically? And then secondly, is your leadership also representative? And the answer to that second question is usually no. So think about why that is. What is the pipeline of leadership through your organization? Where are you losing people? In many of my organizations, we've had the Rooney Rule, which I should not say because I know nothing about sports. And every time I give this analogy, my husband's like, "You are butchering it." But supposedly, in professional football, there is a rule that for head coach positions, in the final three, there needs to be at least one equally qualified person of color. And so when we, in my organizations, when we're hiring staff, often in the traditional search firm process, or we posted it on our website, when we get to that final three, we haven't cast a wide enough net and we don't have a similarly qualified person. And so what we always do in that process is keep looking. It doesn't mean that you're going to hire the person of color, but it means that you are putting in the effort and work to make sure that that candidate is around the table. And what we've been really clear with search firm partners about, this is something that's happened to me a number of times, and I'm guessing it's happened to some of you. A search firm has reached out and said, "Hey, are you interested in XYZ job?" And you say, "It's not a good fit. I'm not ready to leave. Could I just send your materials forward?" You don't have to take it. It'd just be good for them to get to know you. That is really the search firm's push to make sure that they have a diverse candidate pool. And what I say to those search firms is, I'm not a candidate. I've already told you I'm not interested in the position, so you have to do the work to keep on looking, so that the board of that organization can't say, "Well, we did have a diverse pool, but they decided not to take the job." So it's really putting the onus on the organization to keep digging and keep looking until you find those candidates.
So an interesting phrase that came up that's relevant to the discussion, checkbox equity.
Yeah, that's exhausting and common. Um, Here's what I will say about that. It's exhausting and it's frustrating, and it's the first step. I've worked with a lot of organizations that don't even have checkbox diversity or equity or inclusion in their organization. They haven't gotten that far. So I see it as a developmental phase, and a starting point. And then what does it look like to move past that? I really sit in the corner of, let's not make perfect the enemy of the good. And a lot of organizations and a lot of individuals will not do any of this work until they feel like they can do it perfectly, because they don't want to tick people off and they don't want to say the wrong thing, and all that sort of stuff. So we've got to kind of power through that checkbox phase to get to the real work, but it's tiring. Julia, we've got time for probably one or two more questions.
Great. A future in which facts and data matter, and in which we break through long-held biases to get people to really see the truth of where racial and gender inequities come from.
Yeah. I wish for that future too. There's a lot of organizations that are working on things like the future of evidence. What does it take for people to trust? And what does it take to share information in a way where people are able to receive it? Sometimes our organizations sit too much in the facts and figures place, and we're not grabbing them the way that misinformation does. And so I think that's a communications need in the nonprofit sector, is to get better about how we communicate true information. because we are competing with sort of slick and sticky untrue information. So we've got to up our game during this time. And Julia, last one, if we've got one more.
Yes. A combination of those looking to the future of organizations and the future of a community. Our goals for our community is to be connected, healthy, and resilient. Others in our group talked about their goal for their organizations being sustainable and able to survive future hardships.
Yeah, for sure. I think there is such a need right now for organizations to shore up their ability to manage times of strife, which is, hard to do while we're in a time of strife. But I saw a lot of organizations that shut down in weeks 2 and 3 of the stay-at-home order because they were on a really sort of weak foundation financially, and just that little bit of volatility completely made them fall apart. Think about what those weak spots are in your organizations that have been exposed during this time and shore them up. That's, learn from mistakes that we've made in the past, but really this is a time for organizations to think about what it takes to be strong in the longer term. Julia, thanks so much for those questions, and thanks everybody for your thoughts, ideas, and questions. I'm just going to leave you with a couple thoughts. The best way to predict the future is to create it. The future is not some terrible, scary thing coming towards you. You are deciding today, are we going to create a Star Trek future or a Hunger Games future? It may feel like a Hunger Games future at the moment, but we are making decisions that determine what that future looks like. It's also an unsettling time for humankind that really likes predictability, because we're in a time of exponential change, where change happens faster and quicker day after day. This is not going to slow down. This pace of change is only going to get faster, which means that we have to adapt as people to be able to manage that sort of change. This is really a time for nonprofits and foundations to play big and to really start to solve problems instead of trying to make them 5% less terrible. This is really about what does it take to solve things. So this is a time for each of you to create your dent and to really push forward the change that's necessary in your organizations. So if you need any assistance in your own organizations facilitating these conversations, you can check me out on tristaharris.org. There's a option on the consulting page to connect with me. This is also where you get your free copy of the Future Good book. And then the next session is June 12th, and that's a session on signals of the future. So these are the things that you're doing right now that are going to lead to that ideal future that you're excited about. So if you haven't signed up for that session yet, sign up using that bit.ly link and share with other people in your organization and other colleagues that you work with, because I think the sector is really going to change when we all start to have these conversations about the future. So I appreciate you coming out today. Thanks for your thoughtfulness, and thanks for your willingness to create a more equitable future. Bye, everybody.